Hey friends, this is a true story locals swear by. Just outside Denpasar, Bali, there's one rule after dark. Don't look up at the roof. When the incense smoke thins, the elders' breaths falter, and something wet crawls, seeking a marked bloodline. By the end of this video, you'll learn why some families here don't inherit land. They inherit a hunter. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Maid was in his mid-20s, an ordinary young man by every measure. Raised in Denpasar, the capital of Bali, he grew up with the noise of scooters rushing down Jalan Gajah Mada, the smell of satay grilling by the roadside, and the constant chatter of neighbours spilling into each other's courtyards. He worked a modest job at a small printing shop in the city, designing flyers for local events and sometimes wedding invitations for couples who wanted something more stylish than handwritten cards. His life was unremarkable, maybe even predictable, and that was exactly how he liked it. But family has a way of calling you back. One phone call was all it took. His aunt's voice shook over the line. "Your grandmother is weak. She doesn't eat. You must come back." For Mardi, there was no hesitation. He packed a small bag, tucked in a box of medicine he had bought from the pharmacy near Kumbasari market, and boarded the old minibus heading inland toward his mother's village. The journey itself felt familiar yet strange. Rows of green rice paddies stretched endlessly, dotted with scarecrows wearing faded shirts. Palm trees leaned over the narrow road. Children played near the irrigation ditches, laughing, their voices echoing against the hills. And yet, as the bus climbed higher into the countryside, the air grew thicker, quieter. Even the driver, a chatty man in his 40s, stopped speaking as the road wound past a dense stretch of forest. When Maid stepped down from the bus, the village looked almost timeless. Stone houses with moss-covered walls lined the narrow paths. Most had thatched roofs, some patched with zinc sheets where storms had torn the old palm leaves away. The smell of wood smoke hung in the evening air, mixing with the sweet scent of coconut trees that towered above like watchful guardians. Oil lamps glowed faintly at doorways, casting orange halos onto the earth below. The villagers noticed him immediately. Some nodded politely, but most averted their eyes. A few whispered quickly and ushered their children indoors. Maid frowned. He had visited many times as a child, running barefoot with cousins through the rice terraces. Back then, people welcomed him with bowls of fried bananas and glasses of sweet tea. But this time, the warmth was gone. His grandmother's house stood at the far end of the village, half hidden by bamboo and jackfruit trees. Inside, the air was cool and heavy. His grandmother lay on a thin mattress, her frame so fragile it looked as though the blanket itself weighed too much on her chest. Her breathing was shallow, barely a whisper of life. His aunt sat beside her, wringing her hands. She glanced up when Maid entered and forced a smile. "You came? Good. Maybe she will wake more when she sees you." Maid knelt beside the bed, taking his grandmother's cold hand in his own. He spoke softly, telling her he had brought medicine, that she would feel stronger soon. But his aunt shook her head. "We've tried everything," she murmured. "The doctor in town gave her pills. The priest came to pray. We even made offerings at the temple. Nothing changes. Chickens refuse to lay eggs. The plants in our yard shrivel overnight. Every night we hear wings, viscous wings, flapping over the house. The dogs howl until morning. The children do not sleep." Her words made Maid's skin prickle. He wanted to dismiss it. He wanted to tell her that sickness was sickness, that sometimes age simply wins, no matter how many offerings are made. But even as he opened his mouth, he remembered his own nights in the city, when sleep was broken by strange dreams. Dreams of his grandmother's house. Dreams of something moving just beyond the bamboo grove. He shook it off. He was here now, and he had a simple purpose: to care for his grandmother. That was all. The rest of the day passed quietly. He unpacked his bag, helped his aunt boil rice porridge, and tried to bring normalcy back into the small household. The medicine remained on the wooden table, unopened, as if they all secretly believed it would not matter. When night fell, the atmosphere shifted. The oil lamp sputtered, its glow flickering across the cracked walls. Outside, the cicadas sang loud and unrelenting, but beneath their chorus was another sound, one that made Maid pause as he carried a bucket of water to the washroom. Flap, flap, flap. It wasn't the dry, sharp flutter of a bat's wings. It was heavier, slicker, like fabric soaked in rain being shaken in the dark. The dogs began to bark, their voices breaking into howls. Somewhere in the village, a baby cried, shrill and terrified. Maid clenched his jaw and forced himself not to look into the sky. He told himself it was nothing, just night animals, just the imagination of villagers too used to old stories. He went back inside, bolted the wooden door, and sat beside his grandmother until the sounds faded into the early hours of morning. To anyone else, this would seem like an ordinary visit home, a grandson coming back to care for an aging grandmother. The setting was simple, relatable. A small village, an old house, a family trying to hold together in difficult times. There was nothing overtly supernatural in the daylight, only people cooking rice, sweeping yards, whispering about misfortune. And that is what makes it unsettling, because if Maid's story could begin in such a normal, almost mundane way, then it could happen to anyone, to any of us. One phone call about a sick relative, one return to a childhood home, one quiet village where the air feels just a little too heavy and the nights stretch just a little too long. We tell ourselves it's coincidence. We tell ourselves it's imagination. But deep down, we recognize the truth. The ordinary world is where the extraordinary often hides. And when it finally steps out from the shadows, we are never ready. 1:58. Stinger sound. Cut scene. Sudden close-up of flickering incense smoke thinning out, synced with a laboured breath audio, then cut to dark roof silhouette. The room was heavy with the smell of burning incense, and Maddie sat stiffly on the wooden stool beside his grandmother's bed, watching the thin grey smoke coil and twist above the flickering flame of the oil lamp. At first, he thought nothing of it, just another ritual his aunt had insisted on, another offering meant to comfort the old woman who lay struggling to breathe. But then he noticed a strange rhythm. Whenever the smoke grew faint and transparent, his grandmother's chest shuddered, her breath catching, the sound of air scraping against weak lungs. Whenever the smoke thickened again, her breathing eased, almost as if something unseen was helping her, feeding her life through the air itself. Maid blinked, rubbed his eyes, and muttered under his breath that he was tired, that he had travelled too far from Denpasar, that the patterns were just coincidence. He tried to convince himself the incense was only smoke, nothing more, but deep down, the thought clung like a burr. What if the flame was tied to her body, as if her soul and the burning stick were linked by some thread he could not see? A sound broke through his thoughts. At first, he dismissed it as rats or lizards scurrying along the rafters. Every house in the village had them, and the roof above was old, the clay tiles chipped and patched. But the sound was wrong. It wasn't scratching or skittering. It was slow, deliberate, heavy. A sluicing smear, thick and damp, like something alive and burdened was being pulled across the roof. His breath caught in his throat, his grandmother stirred, lips moving, and he remembered something she had told him years ago when he was just a boy, afraid of the dark. Don't ever look up at the roof. Don't ever look up at the roof. Don't let it see your eyes. Back then, he had laughed, thinking it was just another village superstition meant to keep children obedient at night. But now, with the weight of her words echoing in his ears, The command felt more like a warning passed down through blood. The sluicing above grew louder. The wooden beams creaked as if something heavy pressed down. Dust sifted from the ceiling and floated in the lamplight. Maid's body froze, every nerve urging him to look up, but his grandmother's voice anchored him. He stared at the floorboards, at the trembling outline of her fragile body on the bed, refusing to glance toward the roof. He tried to reason with himself, whispering that it was just old wood shifting with the night air, or a stray cat prowling where it shouldn't. But no cat sounded like a corded mass sliding across clay. No animal moved with such deliberate patience. His hand trembled as he adjusted the wick of the lamp, forcing light into the corners of the room. But the shadows only seemed to deepen, gathering in places where the glow could not reach. The villagers' faces returned to him, the way they had avoided his eyes when he carried medicine through the stone path, the way his aunt had confessed that offerings no longer worked, that chickens would not lay eggs, that the trees in the yard had begun to wither. He had dismissed it as fear, as gossip born from isolation. Yet now, the weight above seemed to confirm every whispered story. He clenched the side of the bed, reminding himself he had come to help, to comfort his grandmother, not to feed old tales. Still, his heartbeat drummed against his ribs, and every drag of that unseen weight across the tiles felt like a clock counting down to something he could not name. He wanted to turn on the small radio in his bag, to drown the sound with static or music from the city, but instinct stopped him. A strange certainty settled over him. Noise would draw its attention, noise would invite it closer. Better to sit still, to hold the silence like a shield. He tried to steady his breathing, counting slowly, but the rhythm of the smoke and his grandmother's breath kept pulling his focus. Thin smoke, laboured breath, thick smoke, easy breath. Back and forth, like the rise and fall of waves dragging her toward a shore she could not escape. The pattern was too exact to be chance. It was control, as if some unseen presence was playing with her life, deciding when she could inhale and when she must choke. The sense of being watched pressed down harder than the sound. Maid kept his gaze fixed on the lamp, on the floor, on anything but the ceiling. Yet the weight of unseen eyes burned at the top of his skull. It was not simply movement up there. It was waiting, patient, calculating. The same patience he had seen once when a stray dog crouched before pouncing. The same silence before a storm breaks. His lips moved in a prayer he had not spoken since he was a boy, the old chants rising awkwardly in his throat. The smoke stung his eyes, sharp and acrid, but he dared not blow it out. Without the incense, would his grandmother stop breathing altogether? The sluicing slowed, then stopped. The roof groaned as if relieved of its burden, and for a moment the silence was almost unbearable. Maid allowed himself to hope it had gone, that the night would pass with no more signs. But then something damp struck the floor beside his foot. A single drop, thick and dark, spread into the grain of the wood. He stared at it, stomach twisting, and his grandmother shifted again, her hand twitching toward his arm. He refused to look up, refused to break the fragile line of safety her old warning had drawn. His body was rigid, every muscle screaming to flee the house, but he stayed, bound by love, by fear, by the suffocating sense that leaving would only make it follow. The hours crept until dawn. The sound never returned, but the silence was worse, a silence alive with threat. By morning, the incense had burned to ash, leaving only a faint trace of smoke that drifted upward and disappeared. His grandmother still breathed, fragile and shallow, alive yet tethered. The daylight painted the house ordinary again, stone walls, thatched roof, the yard with its wilted plants. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Maid knew what he had heard, what he had refused to see. He had told himself stories to survive the night, rationalized every detail as fatigue or imagination. but the truth was etched into his bones. The warning had already been given. The sound above, the blood-dark drop, the memory of his grandmother's words. They were pieces of a puzzle he did not want to finish. And though he had not looked, though he had obeyed, he felt with terrible certainty that the thing above now knew him, knew his silence, knew his presence in this house. It had marked him in the same way the smoke had marked her breathing. He stepped outside at dawn, blinking against the light, and the village seemed normal. Roosters crowing, a motorbike rattling down the dirt road, neighbours sweeping their front steps. Yet every shadow looked deeper. Every sound carried the echo of sluicing across tiles. He drew a breath of fresh air, but even then, he could not shake the taste of incense and ash on his tongue. He thought of leaving, of running back to the city, but the weight of his grandmother's illness held him. He was part of this bloodline, and bloodlines do not escape curses simply by stepping away. He knew, even without looking back, that the thing on the roof had not gone. It had only paused, waiting for the next night when silence, smoke, and prayer would no longer be enough. The aunt presses salt into Maid's palm. "Scatter it at the doors and windows," she says, not looking toward the rafters. "Old ways keep old things out." He does as told. The grains tick like beads on wood. When the last handful hits the sill, a faint hiss rises, quick and mean like water on hot iron. Maid freezes. The aunt hears nothing. "Just the breeze," she says, turning the lamp down. Before sleep, he checks every line. Gran's chest lifts and falls like a trapped bird. When the flame thins, she struggles. When it fattens, she eases. At dawn, he steps into the yard and stops. Footprints circle the house, press deeper at corners, as if a listener leaned in. The toes are long, claw-like, curving into the mud. He calls for his aunt. By the time she arrives, a breeze smears the shapes. "Dogs," she says. "Kids." The evidence dissolves. Ketut, the neighbour, comes with a small bundle. He sets flowers and rice on a leaf tray at the threshold, whispers a prayer, and bows. "Your family is marked," he says. "Grandmother is only the start." The aunt snaps. That fear breeds fear. Ketut stares at the doorway as if it were a throat. Strange things repeat, as if the house is practicing them. At sundown, the salt hisses again, though Maid hasn't touched it. The kitchen lamp stutters 3 times, then steadies. Gran's breath follows. From the roof comes the viscous trail he heard before, a corded mass sliding across tile. When he looks up, the rafters seem lower, as if the night leaned down to smell him. He tests the windows, latches hold. Still, by morning, a slick curl of hair is caught on the frame. He shows it to his aunt. "Old wood catches everything," she says. "Don't make stories." Cats gather along the fence at dark, backs raised. Maid burns incense, the smoke ribbons in a tight column. With every thinning, Gran rattles. He times the intervals. The gaps shrink, like something learning his rhythm. Morning, new footprints closer to the walls. He wakes his aunt while dew still shines in the toe pits. She lifts the curtain, and a breeze flattens the shapes. "See? Mud." Across the lane, Ketut watches with his palm raised. Maid tries to be reasonable. He photographs the salt lines. At midnight, the images show nothing but grit and shadow. At 1, the photo app locks. At 2, it crashes. When he wakes, the back door line is broken, just a finger's width. But across it runs a damp drag, as if a body pulled itself through without feet. He sweeps, salts again. This time the hiss is louder, a spit of anger. The lamp pinches blue before flaring back to gold. Gran moans and claws her throat. He lowers her hand. By the 3rd day, the air tastes metallic, turning water bitter. Chickens refuse to peck near the kitchen step. The aunt says it's old pipes and superstition. She returns from a healer with red thread and ties it around Gran's wrist. The loose end lifts as if in breeze. No one else feels it. Rain skates across the roof at night. The viscous trail stops, replaced by a gentle tapping on the window. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. The same count as the lamp's stutter and the cat's calls. On the glass, 5 thin smears slide down and vanish. His palm, when he wipes them, smells faintly of iron. He tells the aunt. She presses her lips into a blade. You need sleep. At dawn, Ketut leaves another offering. Marigolds, coffee powder, a slice of lime. He does not cross the salt. What marks likes breath, he says. It likes families that keep their old ones alive. The aunt shuts the door. Events return sharper. A gurgle in the rafters becomes a scrape, becomes a slide across the sill, becomes breath in his ear, cool and damp. When he turns, only the lamp dances. The salt thins near the bed without footprints crossing, as if the grains surrender on their own. He paints turmeric water on the floor. The stain dries like a map of veins. He tries science. On a scrap he records times. 11:17 hiss, 12:03 taps, 1:26 drag, 2:10 Gran gasps, 2:11 smoke swells. He hopes coincidence will appear. Instead, the marks tighten into a spiral around the small hours, a pattern that mirrors the prints outside. He thinks of Ketut's word, marked, and feels the circle close. 4th morning, a damp trail worms along the hallway ceiling, as if something heavy crawled there. He sets a bucket. By noon, it's dry, though the damp remains. The aunt stands under it and declares a leak. He says nothing about the way it begins where rain cannot reach. That evening, he glimpses a pale strand fluttering by the eaves, stitched to the dark, moving with deliberate grace. He blinks, and it's gone. The lamp blackens its chimney. Soot marks his fingers with long, curved lines like the outdoor tracks. He starts sleeping in a chair beside the bed, a bowl of salt within reach. Whenever the hiss comes, he casts a pinch. The house answers with the soft, slick rasp of lips unsealing. Gran dreams of rivers and wakes choking. He mutters childhood prayers. The syllables snag, thick as hair. Sleep comes in splinters, brief and cutting. Each blink feels longer than the last, and every breath seems borrowed from the house itself. No one else notices or believes. The aunt counts tablets with eyes lowered. Ketut watches the window and mouths a silent prayer he never admits to saying. Children play by the fence but never look at the house. By the thin moon, repetition becomes drumbeat. Hiss, taps, circling prints, drag across tile, breath that isn't wind. Each return steals a little certainty and stores it somewhere he cannot follow. The house is teaching him a language, one sound at a time. He fears the last word. 3:45. Stinger sound. Plus cut scene. Abrupt audio of a low, wet hiss building to a sharp tap. Cut to blurred footprints in mud fading away. The clock had just struck midnight when the silence of the Balinese night shattered. The oil lamp in the corner sputtered, its flame dwindling to a thin, nervous flicker. Incense that had burned for hours was nothing but a curled stick of ash. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, bending and twisting as though alive. Then came the sound. A slick rasp, like a corded mass sliding across stone. It rose from outside the house, crept toward the thin wooden door, and coiled around the family like an invisible snake. Maid froze, the blood draining from his face. He dared a glance at the window, a pale face pressed against the thin pane of glass. The skin was translucent, veins crawling like worms beneath the surface. Its eyes burned with a crimson glow, bright enough to pierce the darkness. From its gaping mouth dripped bile, splattering down the window frame, and dangling from its neck, A dark mass trailed like ropes, wet and breathing, diseased, swollen, still twitching as if alive. They smeared the glass with yellow-green fluid as the creature shifted, searching, hungry. The house shuddered with a sudden, piercing scream. The glass rattled violently, almost bursting from the frame. The grandmother, already weak and gasping for air, convulsed. Her chest rose in one last shallow heave and then stilled. Maid's aunt shrieked, stumbling backward, clutching a bundle of dried leaves. With trembling hands, she struck a match, setting the leaves ablaze. The smoke poured thick and acrid, filling the air with a bitter sting. She thrust the smouldering bundle toward the door, chanting prayers, forcing the smoke at the window. The creature recoiled, its scream turning into a guttural growl. But it did not retreat. It pressed harder, bile splashing as its body slithered against the cracks. Its torso was little more than a rib cage dragging an empty cavity, and from that cavity dangled strings of viscera, dripping with blood and rot. The wooden frame groaned. The door buckled. A clawed hand, blackened and damp, slid through the gap in the window shutter. The nail scratched across the wall, leaving deep splintering grooves. The aunt coughed, her eyes watering from the smoke. She chanted faster, louder, her voice breaking. But the sound was drowned out by the monster's shrieking laughter, a sound that rose and fell like a chorus of wailing infants, blending agony with mockery. Maid could not move. His legs had turned to stone. He wanted to protect his grandmother, but she was already gone. He wanted to help his aunt, but he was paralyzed by terror. His ears rang with the unholy sound. His body shivered at the violent pounding as the house shook on its foundation. The creature forced its way further, pressing its head and torso through the gap. Its viscera splashed across the floor, leaving trails of slime that hissed when they touched the salt scattered earlier that night. The grains blackened instantly, releasing a faint hiss like burning metal. Maid's heart thundered in his chest. His mind screamed, "Run!" But his body betrayed him. He stumbled backward, his breath shallow, his eyes locked on the horror unfurling before him. The aunt threw the smoking bundle into the monster's path. Flames burst briefly, but the creature lunged through them, shrieking in fury, its glowing eyes fixed on Maid. The room reeked of death, bile, and smoke. The boy clutched at his chest, as if that might keep his heart from bursting. His vision blurred with tears. He saw his grandmother's lifeless body slumped on the bed, the faint lamplight casting her face in shadow. And beyond her, the shadow of the leak filled the room. The ceiling rattled. Tiles above cracked. The entire house groaned like it was being torn apart. The walls pulsed as though they were breathing, straining under the monster's presence. The aunt screamed at Maid to move, to hide, but her voice barely reached him through the deafening roar. The leak's viscera whipped across the floor, knocking over a chair, splattering the wooden boards with thick, black fluid that hissed and smoked on contact. Maid stumbled toward the corner, but the creature was faster. Its bile, slick viscera lashed around his ankle. The touch burned like acid, searing through his skin. He cried out, collapsing onto the floor. The aunt leapt forward, clawing at the slimy cords, her hands blistering as the bile touched her skin. She screamed, refusing to let go, pulling with every ounce of her strength. The creature shrieked, its glowing eyes widening in fury, bile spraying across the walls. For a moment, the world spun in chaos. Smoke, screams, fire, bile, the unrelenting pounding of something unnatural trying to force its way inside. Maid realized then, in a moment of dizzy terror, this was not just an apparition. This was a predator, a curse that had stalked his family for generations. And now it had found its way to him. The oil lamp finally gave out, plunging the room into near darkness. Only the hellish glow of the leak's eyes lit the scene. Red light flickered across Maid's terrified face, across his aunt's struggling hands, across the lifeless body of his grandmother. The monster laughed again, a sound like bones snapping, like glass grinding underfoot. It dragged itself further inside. Made he could see every hideous detail, the dark mass glistening, the bile steaming, the skeletal hands tearing grooves into the floor. He screamed. Not a word, not a name, just raw, human terror echoing against the trembling walls. And still, he could not move. The front door crashed open with a thunder that shook the walls, and Maid felt as if the earth itself had split apart. Ketut stormed in, face streaked with sweat, carrying a bowl of foul liquid that reeked of rot and metal. His mouth moved quickly, ancient syllables spilling out in a chant older than memory. He splashed the liquid across the floor, and where it struck the boards, smoke hissed upward. The leak recoiled with a piercing shriek, viscera writhing like diseased serpents. For a flicker of hope, Maid thought it might vanish. But then its eyes, glowing red and damp, locked onto him with merciless hunger. The creature whispered his name, not in a voice, but in a choking gurgle, like blood bubbling through broken lungs. Maid froze. The talisman in his hand burned hotter than fire, branding his skin. But he couldn't let go. Grandmother, moments before too weak to breathe, sat upright with a violent shudder. Her eyes had turned bloodshot, veins like rivers of flame, and her voice ripped the silence with one final command. "Go! Now!" The word was half order, half plea, and it shattered Maid's paralysis. His aunt seized his arm and yanked him so hard his shoulder nearly dislocated. He stumbled after her as Ketut kept chanting, his voice louder, desperate, the house groaning as if the beams were splintering under invisible weight. Behind them, the leak flung itself forward, shrieking, its organs dragging across the floor like chains pulled through blood. The door slammed as they burst outside, but even through the wood, Maid heard the thing screaming his name. The night air hit his lungs like smoke, thick and suffocating. The lamps along the dirt path flickered, throwing out faint halos that dissolved before they reached the shadows. His bare feet slapped the ground, sharp stones cutting deep, but pain barely registered above the terror surging through him. His aunt dragged him forward with strength he never knew she had. The path stretched endlessly, each step heavier than the last. Still behind them, he felt the weight of eyes pressing against his back. Every whisper of wind carried the syllables of his name. He dared not turn around. The talisman in his palm seared hotter, his skin blistering, the smell of scorched flesh filling his nose. His aunt's voice cracked through the night like a whip. "Don't you dare stop!" Her command gave him the strength to keep moving. They reached the old banyan tree at the crossroads. Its roots stretched wide, gnarled and ancient, draped in offerings of flowers, rice and coins glinting faintly in the dim light. His aunt shoved him toward it, urging him to place the talisman down. Maid collapsed against the roots, trembling uncontrollably. His hand shook as he pressed the burning charm into the bark. The wood hissed, smoke rising where it touched, and for the first time all night, the whispers stopped. A silence so sudden it was deafening spread around them. Then came the sound, faint but distinct, of something dragging itself away, deeper into the dark. The leak was retreating, not destroyed, not gone, only pushed back, like a tide waiting for its chance to return. When dawn bled across the sky, the village looked deceptively ordinary. Roosters crowed. Smoke curled lazily from kitchens. Children played barefoot in the dust. But to Maid, nothing was the same. His palm bore a blistered mark in the shape of an eye, unblinking, staring back at him no matter how tightly he wrapped it in cloth. Water stung it like acid, and every time he tried to sleep, he woke with the phantom sensation of viscera brushing across his skin. The sound of his name whispered in the dark had imprinted itself into his memory. His body trembled without warning. his mind circling endlessly back to grandmother's command, her red eyes, her finger pointing to the door. The house was gone from view, but not from him. It followed in dreams, in silence, in every flicker of shadow. Grandmother's body had survived, but her spirit seemed broken. She lay muttering prayers, eyes dull, her voice thin. His aunt, once the voice of reason, had been stripped of her certainty. She refused to step near the cursed house, refused to collect even clothes or photographs. Everything was abandoned, the heirlooms, the memories, the land itself. Ketut, drained and silent, finally told them the truth none wanted to hear. The leak was bound not to places but to bloodlines. It could not be killed. It could only be delayed, only escaped for a while until it remembered you again. And when it did, it always returned. They left before sunset, not daring to stay another night. Their belongings fit into one bag. Maid carried his grandmother on his back along the road out of the village, each step a betrayal of the soil where his family had lived for generations. Yet survival demanded it. Behind them, the house stood silent, but Maid could feel it, breathing, waiting, watching. At the edge of Denpasar, the noise of the city swallowed the memory of chanting and shrieking. Traffic hummed, vendors called, life moved on. For the first time in days, Maid allowed himself a shaky breath. He told himself they had made it. They had escaped. But deep down, he knew it was only distance, not deliverance. Weeks later, in his new apartment, he stood at the window overlooking traffic. The glass was clean, ordinary, reflecting nothing more sinister than neon and headlights. Yet one evening, just for an instant, he swore he saw it again. A pale face pressed against the glass, a dark mass trailing like ropes across the reflection. He blinked hard, and it was gone. Still, his heart raced as if he had just fled that house again. His palm burned under the bandage, the blistered eye never healing. He whispered to himself, "It can't be here. It can't." But doubt gnawed at him. He would never be sure. He had survived the night, but he carried the scars in his flesh, in his mind, in his bloodline. Survival was not victory. Escape was not freedom. And some curses don't die when you leave the house. They follow, patient, waiting for the moment you believe you are safe. 5:05. Stinger sound. Cut scene. Eerie whisper of a name echoing, fading into a pale face reflection in glass, then abrupt cut to black. The night pressed down on the house, heavy as stone, the kind of darkness that seemed to have weight, pressing against the skin and lungs. The oil lamp outside sputtered in the wind, its glow trembling across the dirt courtyard, stretching shadows into long, crooked fingers that clawed toward the walls. Maid staggered to the doorway, chest heaving, his palm blistered from the burning talisman he still clutched. Behind him, inside, his aunt whispered frantic prayers, clutching his grandmother's frail body as though she could anchor her soul to earth by sheer force of devotion. But outside, Ketut waited, his posture rigid, his face pale, sweat rolling down his temples. His eyes darted constantly toward the black line of jungle trees, as though he feared the shadows might suddenly take shape. When Maid demanded an explanation, his voice cracking with anger and fear, Ketut leaned closer, and his whisper was sharp as broken glass. "It isn't her it wants, it's you. The leak feeds on the weakest in a bloodline. Not just age, not just illness. Weakness of faith, doubt, rage. You brought it here." The words seemed impossible at first, absurd, but they hung in the air with a weight that could not be ignored. They sank into Maid's bones until memory itself began to align, like shards forming the edge of a blade, cutting through every lie he had told himself since he returned. Ketut spoke quickly, as if speaking too long might summon the thing itself. Long before Maid's grandmother was even born, The village had lived under the shadow of this curse. Generations ago, a priest turned sorcerer had been humiliated by rivals, stripped of honor, his teachings mocked. In desperation, he sought the forbidden arts, tearing apart his body until his head could detach and fly into the night, a dark mass trailing like ropes, wet and breathing. He was the first leak. The villagers rose against him, burning his home, scattering his ashes into the river. But curses do not burn. Before he died, the sorcerer vowed that his spirit would never rest until he found families broken from within. His revenge was not against strangers, but against bloodlines with cracks. Each time the curse returned, it chose a family whose unity faltered, feeding on those weaknesses, generation after generation. Ketut's grandfather had seen it once before. A cousin, marked by jealousy, was found drained, his body shriveled like dried fruit. An infant in another house died without wounds, though the cradle was slick with blood. Every time it struck, the elders said the same thing. The leak never wanders randomly. It waits, searching for fractures, unforgiven grudges, hidden anger, faith abandoned. When it finds the weakest in a family, it burrows in. That person becomes the door. Maid shook his head violently, trying to deny it. It was after grandmother. She's sick. She's vulnerable. Everyone knows. But Ketut cut him off, his eyes cutting deep into Maid's soul. No. We all prayed for her. We carried her, shielded her. The spirit circled, but it never entered. Only when you returned from the city did it stir. You think we feared for her. No, we feared for you. The memories came back in a rush. The villagers who avoided his gaze when he arrived, who whispered as he passed. The bowls of rice and flowers left quietly outside his grandmother's door. He had thought it pity or kindness. Now he realized it was protection. They were not shielding her from the spirit. They were shielding themselves from him. You doubt, Ketut said, voice low but fierce. You left our ways. You mocked our prayers. You buried rage at your father, and you never forgave. You never believed. That fracture inside you, that is the door, and the leak has walked through it. The incense that had twisted strangely, the viscous trails that scraped across the roof tiles, the footprints in the dirt circling the house, none of it had been random. Every sign had been tethered to him. When the smoke thinned by his grandmother's side, it wasn't her spirit faltering. It was his doubt unraveling the prayer. When the footprints pressed into the soil at dawn, they weren't hunting her. They were marking him. Even the way the elders averted their eyes had not been shame or sorrow. It had been recognition. They had seen this shadow before and knew it would fasten itself to him. Maid's knees gave way, and he dropped to the threshold, clutching the talisman until its edges burned into his palm. His voice cracked. So it was never her. It was never random. It was always me. Ketut nodded bitterly. Yes, the curse seeks bloodlines. When faith breaks, when anger festers, when doubt grows, it becomes strong. Families try to hide it, but curses crawl like roots. They wait until one generation weakens enough. And Maid, you are that weakness. Inside the house, his aunt's voice grew shrill with desperation, calling on gods and ancestors alike. His grandmother stirred, whispering words too faint to catch. The oil lamp guttered, the flame shrinking to a trembling blue spark. And then, faint but undeniable, came the sound of wings, damp, furious, beating above the roof. All his life, Maid had believed curses were stories for children, meant to frighten them into obedience. He had left the village, buried himself in the noise of the city, refusing the old ways. He had ignored the prayers his grandmother taught, dismissed the rituals his aunt begged him to remember. He had carried the grief of his father's death like a sealed wound, festering in silence, turning into rage. Those wounds had hollowed him out, And in that hollow, the leak had taken root. The truth pressed on him like suffocation. The curse was not random. It was not about innocence or guilt. It was not even about his grandmother's illness. It sought fractures, and he was that fracture. He was not simply a witness to the haunting. He was its target. A sudden gust ripped through the courtyard, scattering ash from the incense, spinning it like black snow. The talisman cracked in his hand, curling into smoke as if consumed from within. Ketut's voice hardened, final and merciless. It doesn't want her. It doesn't want me. It wants you. You are the door. If you stand, it may pass. If you fall, it will feast. Maid stared at the jungle, at the shadows shifting between the trees, shapes that seemed almost human but slick and wrong, waiting just beyond sight. For the first time, he understood the terror in the villagers' eyes, the whispered prayers, the offerings laid out in silence. They had never doubted who the curse would choose. They had seen the door long before he opened it. Every clue, every scream, every unanswered question, all of it pointed to this moment. The origin was not just the sorcerer who had birthed the leak centuries ago. The origin was inside him, in the fractures he had carried all his life. And now the curse had chosen. What do you think? If you were standing outside that house, hearing something dragging across the roof, would you dare look up? Or would you keep your eyes fixed on the ground? In Balinese folklore, the leak is not just a monster, but a mirror of weakness within a family. It is believed to feed on bloodlines, searching for cracks, whether it's doubt, rage, or faith shaken. Unlike Western ghosts that haunt places, the leak clings to people, especially the most vulnerable in a lineage. That's why villagers burn incense, whisper prayers, and avoid looking up at night. To meet its eyes is to invite it closer, to acknowledge the curse and give it power. Maid thought he was just visiting to care for his grandmother. Instead, he discovered the burden wasn't hers alone. It was written into the family's blood, waiting for him. This is the terrifying difference. In Bali, some curses don't die with the elder. They pass down, hungry, patient, inevitable. So, would you look up or keep your eyes down? Comment silence if you'd refuse to meet its gaze. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next true Asian horror story. If this reached you, share it to one friend who'd still look up.